Charming cobblestone streets, bustling communities, endless greenery. A country so beautiful and vibrant was once cloaked in a blanket of darkness and despair. The first country to bear the brunt of the Nazi war machine. Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, the start of World War II. But the war's end, most of Warsaw, Poland's capital city, was destroyed. Its buildings pulverized after heavy bombing. Its population cut dramatically.
Jews very often lived alongside Poles without living with Poles.
Approximately 3 million Polish Jews were murdered. That was about 90% of the country's pre-war Jewish population wiped out.
When I was in Europe with one friend, people stop her everywhere.
This is the old town of Warsaw today, a lively tourism hub with quaint alleys and medieval-style buildings, all reconstructed after the war. Now these streets are filled with intrigued visitors from all over the world.
Everybody has something here that will shape them and shatter them and deepen them and offer them something much more profound than they would have gotten if they had not come.
Dr. Michael Berenbaum is a New York native and one of the world's leading Holocaust scholars. He led me and 45 other millennials on an emotional journey through Poland. For 8 days, we visited Nazi extermination camps, ghettos, and mass graves.
This is sort of the most phenomenal opportunity to teach. And you teach people on multiple levels. You teach them historical information. You teach them to understand the nature of the perpetrator, to have a sense of identification with the witness.
During the war, there were hundreds of Nazi camps in Poland. But Michael says there's a reason Auschwitz is the most well-known, the most notorious.
The reason we think of Auschwitz as the worst is because at Auschwitz, people lived in the shadow of death, sometimes for 2, 3, and 4 years.
More than 1 million men, women, and children were murdered here in Auschwitz-Birkenau, a death toll higher than any other camp. But another reason we hear so much about it is because there are Auschwitz survivors, like my grandfather, Newson Rosenberg. He was a young teenager and one of 9 siblings when his family was ripped apart. I refer to my grandpa as my papi. He's still alive today in his 90s. For more than 2 years, he was forced to do hard labor and sleep on wooden planks here inside the barracks of Birkenau Block 10. My papi's parents and 5 of his siblings were not as fortunate. They didn't live to see the war's end.
The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum has estimated that there are 43,500 different camps, which means everywhere in the landscape of Europe.
One camp in that landscape was Belzec, located in southeast Poland. It operated for less than 10 months in 1942. In that short time, about 500,000 Jews were murdered there. There were only 2 known Belzec survivors, which is why we hear so little about this camp. No witnesses to tell their stories. Michael was instrumental in creating and designing this memorial on the former site of Belzec. He worked with the Polish government, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and the American Jewish Committee.
All around this camp, we walk step by step by step, and we see the deportation of every town, village, and hamlet, day by day, month by month, during the 10 months in which this camp was in operation.
Belzec is the 3rd deadliest extermination camp, exceeded only by Auschwitz and Treblinka. Our group visited Treblinka on a beautiful sunny day. It's located in a forest northeast of Warsaw. Approximately 900,000 Jews were killed in its gas chambers in just over a year. Now there are stones here engraved with the names of cities and towns from which the victims originated. Monice Newman, one of our trip's organizers, still feels haunted every time she visits.
For me, Treblinka in the sunlight makes this place even more horrifically beautiful, right? It's beautiful and it's such horror.
While most members of our group were singing songs at Treblinka in memory of those who perished here, Andy Weisenberg went looking for an extra meaningful stone.
The stone behind me represents those from Tomaszow Mazowiecki that were murdered here in Treblinka. Among those are my mother's father's parents, Mendel and Shana Weltman, and his two younger brothers, Eliezer and Wolf Weltman.
Andy is the grandchild of 4 Holocaust survivors. So is his wife, Amanda.
To be able to come here all these years later, and we've lost so much family, to be here together is a really proud moment, I would say.
Memorials like the ones at Treblinka and Belzec are all over Poland, on the sites of former Nazi camps.
There were concentration camps and slave labor camps that were adjacent to virtually every city and every source of slave labor. And society wants to forget how close it was.
And perhaps no camp was as visible or as close in vicinity to a community as Maidonk. The city of Lublin looms over Maidonk, which is the best preserved Nazi concentration camp. It was liberated and taken over by Soviet troops before the Germans could destroy the evidence. About 78,000 victims were killed here, and 7,000 pounds of human ashes are still piled high. More than 500,000 pairs of victims' shoes are preserved. Barracks are still lined with bunks. The crematorium is intact, oven doors wide open. For Andy, this exhibit of cruelty is personal and overwhelming.
We're here in Maidonk, outside of Lublin, where my grandfather, Abraham Weltman, my mother's father, worked for several months in late 1940, helping to build the camp under forced labor conditions. So it's very powerful for me to be here where he once was, and to stand in his footsteps where he survived and fought through.
On my last day in Poland, I went to my poppy's hometown of Pultus. It's a small town about an hour north of Warsaw. I visited the street where my ancestors lived. I also went to the city's town hall, where I found the original birth certificates for my poppy and 4 of his siblings, Gito, Rivka, Chava, and Aaron. I was able to touch the documents and even smell the ink from my great-grandfather Janko Rosenberg's signature. He was murdered early in the war. That day in Pultus was the culmination of everything I learned during my time in Poland and why I decided to make this journey. As Poland moves forward as a nation, there's been a revival of Jewish life throughout the country. Every year, more and more young people have been discovering their Jewish roots. Those leading this effort feel there's still progress to be made, but one thing is evident from my trip: history has been preserved here. Dana Arschin, Fox News.